A sharp, serrated seashell is a safer tool for your throat than a modern safety razor. Imagine you are standing on a windswept coastline 100,000 years ago, the salt spray stinging your eyes and the rhythmic roar of the tide filling your ears. In your hand, you grip a single heavy clam shell, its edge chipped away to reveal a jagged, glass-like rim. You aren't here to gather food or admire the view, you are here to perform a surgery on yourself. You press that cold, wet calcium carbonate against the soft skin of your neck and begin to scrape. It sounds like a mistake, a desperate act of madness in a world where a small infection could mean a slow death. Yet, all across the ancient world, from the sun-drenched shores of the Mediterranean to the freezing rivers of the European interior, our ancestors were doing exactly this. They were risking their lives to remove the very hair that nature had spent millions of years perfecting. This raises a question that defies our basic understanding of survival. Why did ancient humans work so hard to become the only hairless primate in a world that rewarded the thick-furred? However, looking at the shell as a choice suggests we had a choice to begin with. To understand why we started scraping our faces, we have to go back 1.2 million years to a time when we weren't just shaving hair, we were losing it entirely. Before the first shell was ever picked up, our ancestors were as hairy as any chimpanzee or gorilla. But a massive shift was happening in the African savanna. Dr. Mark Pagel, an evolutionary biologist at the University of Reading, has pioneered a theory that explains this transition through the lens of survival. He argues that as humans moved from the shaded forests to the open, blistering heat of the grasslands, fur became a liability. It trapped heat and, more importantly, it was a breeding ground for parasites. In the deep time of our species, a thick coat of fur was essentially a luxury hotel for lice, ticks, and fleas. These aren't just annoyances, they are vectors for disease. By shedding our fur, we became the naked ape, a move that allowed us to sweat more efficiently and stay healthy. But this biological victory left us with a strange leftover. The patches of hair on our heads and faces that refused to go away. Despite the obvious benefits of having less fur, this evolutionary trade-off didn't explain why we felt the need to finish the job manually. If nature wanted us hairless, why did it leave the beard? This is where the story moves forward to roughly 100,000 years ago, into the Middle Stone Age. We find ourselves in the era of the bivalve. Scientists studying early human coastal settlements, particularly in the Pinnacle Point caves of South Africa, have found evidence that our ancestors were becoming obsessed with the ocean. This wasn't just for the protein. When you eat a clam or a large mussel, you are left with two halves of a tool that is naturally ergonomic. The shell of a bivalve is composed of aragonite and calcite, forms of calcium carbonate that are incredibly hard but also capable of holding a surprisingly fine edge when fractured. Archaeologists believe that the very first razors weren't stone at all, but these discarded remnants of lunch. The shell offered a unique mechanical advantage. It could be used as a scraper to shave hair down to the skin, or it could be used as a pair of natural tweezers. By pressing the two valves together, a human could pluck out individual hairs by the root. This was the birth of grooming, born not from vanity, but from a desperate, primal need to control the environment of one's own body. While the shell was a perfect tool for the coast, it was a complete failure for those who wandered deep into the frozen heart of the continents. As we move forward to 30,000 years ago, we enter the height of the last ice age. You would think that in a world of glaciers and mammoths, a thick beard would be a prized possession, a natural scarf to protect against frostbite. But the archaeological record tells a different story. In the caves of France and Spain, we see some of the earliest depictions of human faces in cave art, and many of them are remarkably clean-shaven. This is counterintuitive. Why would an Ice Age hunter-gatherer spend time in a freezing cave scraping their face? The answer lies in the danger of the beard itself. In extreme cold, moisture from your breath traps in facial hair and freezes. This creates a mask of ice against the skin that can cause rapid heat loss or even skin rot. To survive the tundra, you couldn't afford a frozen beard. But since there were no clams in the mountains of Europe, humans turned to the earth. They began to nap flint and obsidian. But obsidian was more than just a substitute for a seashell. It was a technological leap into a realm of sharpness that we still struggle to match today. About 10,000 years ago, as the Neolithic Revolution began to reshape the world, humans perfected the art of pressure flaking. They would take a core of obsidian, a volcanic glass, and use a bone tool to pop off incredibly thin, sharp flakes. To understand how sharp these were, we have to look at the work of Dr. Don Crabtree, a legendary experimental archaeologist. He demonstrated that an obsidian edge can be just 3 nanometers thick. That is roughly 500 times sharper than a modern steel razor blade. While a steel blade looks like a jagged mountain range under a microscope, an obsidian edge is a smooth, continuous line. It doesn't cut the hair so much as it cleaves through the molecular bonds of the protein. The first people to use obsidian razors were experiencing a level of smoothness that most modern men with their 5-blade cartridges could only dream of. Yet, even with this terrifyingly sharp glass, the ritual of the shave remained a dangerous gamble. One slip meant a wound that might never heal in a world without antibiotics. Even though obsidian was the peak of sharpness, it was also incredibly brittle, making it a poor choice for a world that was learning to melt the earth itself. As we cross the threshold into 5,000 years ago, we enter the Bronze Age. This is the era of Otzi the Iceman, whose body was found preserved in a glacier on the border of Austria and Italy. When scientists examined Otzi, they found something fascinating. His hair and beard were neatly trimmed. He wasn't using stone or shells. He was likely using a copper or bronze blade. The transition to metal razors changed everything. Metal could be sharpened, dulled, and then sharpened again. It wasn't disposable like a shell or a stone flake. It became a possession. In the tombs of the early Egyptian dynasties, we find the first dedicated grooming kits. The Egyptians took hair removal to an extreme that bordered on the religious. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Egyptian priests would shave their entire bodies every 2 days to ensure no vermin or other unseemly thing would adhere to them while they served the gods. For the Egyptians, hair was a symbol of the animalistic, the wild, and the chaotic. A smooth, hairless body was a symbol of civilization, purity, and divine order. However, the Egyptian obsession with purity was nothing compared to the way the Romans would eventually turn the shave into a weapon of social control. Moving forward to approximately 300 BC, we arrive in the streets of Republican Rome. Before this period, Romans were generally a bearded people, much like the Greeks. But a massive shift occurred when professional barbers, known as tonsors, were brought over from Sicily. The historian Pliny the Elder records in his Naturalis Historia that the great general Scipio Africanus was the first Roman to shave every single day. This wasn't just a fashion choice, it was a statement of Roman identity. A clean face separated the civilized Roman from the barbaric Gauls and Germans who wore long, matted beards. The Roman barber shop, or tunstrina, became the social engine of the city. It was where news was traded, political deals were struck, and young men underwent the depositio barbae, the ritual first shave that signaled their entry into manhood. But these shaves were brutal. Roman razors, made of iron that rusted easily and dulled quickly, didn't slide across the skin. They scraped. With no shaving cream, only water, the process was so painful and left so many scars that a man's face often became a map of his endurance. While the Roman shave was a symbol of strength, it was also a massive risk that highlighted the strange psychology of our species. Why would a Roman senator or a common soldier subject himself to a daily, painful scraping with a dull iron blade? This leads us to the pivot in our journey. We have traveled from the biological loss of fur to the coastal discovery of shells, through the Ice Age use of stone, and into the metallurgical rituals of the ancient world. Throughout all of this, a single through line emerges. The face is a billboard. In every era, humans have used the act of shaving to signal something to their peers. It is what biologists call an honest signal. By removing the hair that nature gave us, we are saying, I have the time, the tools, and the social status to care for my appearance. I am not a slave to my biology. Shaving with a shell or a stone was a way of declaring that you belonged to a tribe, a religion, or a social class. It was a way of making the face readable, exposing the subtle micro-expressions that allow for complex human cooperation. Despite the thousands of years of technological progress, we often like to think we have evolved beyond these primal motivations. We look at our electric trimmers and our precision-engineered steel and we think we are different from the person standing on that 100,000-year-old beach. We think we shave because of hygiene or professionalism. But those are just modern words for ancient instincts. The hygiene we talk about today is just a sanitized version of Dr. Mark Pagel's parasite theory. The professionalism we strive for is just a modern version of the Roman tunstrina. We are still the same naked ape, desperately trying to prove that we are more than just animals. We are still using tools to carve an identity out of our own flesh, trying to find a way to be seen in a world that is constantly trying to reclaim us. Every time you look in the mirror and decide to change the way you look, you are echoing a move made in the dark of a cave or the salt of a coastline. You are participating in a deep-time ritual that defines our species. We are the animals that refuse to be what we were born as. We are the creatures that saw a piece of trash on a beach, a broken, discarded clamshell, and realized it could be used to reshape the very image of humanity. It is a testament to our ingenuity, but also to our strange, restless vanity. We have spent 100,000 years trying to scrape away our animal nature, one hair at a time, only to find that the very act of scraping is what makes us most human. But this brings us back to the reality of the tool itself. We have covered the why and the how through the vast stretches of time. We have seen the evolution from parasite control to ritual purity to social signaling. But there is a final, darker layer to this story that we rarely acknowledge. Shaving is, at its core, an act of violence against the self. It is the application of a sharpened edge to the most vulnerable part of the human anatomy. When an ancient human picked up a shell, they weren't just grooming, they were practicing a form of controlled risk. They were proving they could handle a blade. They were proving they had a steady hand. In many cultures, the person who shaved you was the only person you trusted completely, because they held your life in their hands every single morning. The barber and the executioner often used the same tools, and in the ancient mind, that connection was never far away. This brings us all the way back to that windswept coastline 100,000 years ago. Think about that person again. They aren't just a primitive ancestor. They are a designer. They are a scientist. They are a person who looked at the jagged edge of a blue mussel shell and saw a way to change their destiny. They didn't have a mirror, only the dark reflection in a tide pool. They didn't have soap, only the cold lubrication of the seawater. But as they scraped that shell across their throat, they were doing something that no other creature on Earth had ever done. They were taking control of their own evolution. They were deciding that their face belonged to them, not to the parasites, not to the cold, and not to nature. However, the shell didn't just change the face, it changed the mind. The moment we began to shave, we began to see ourselves as something separate from the world around us. We became the observers. We became the curators of our own bodies. This psychological shift is perhaps the greatest legacy of the ancient razor. It allowed us to develop the concept of the persona, the mask we wear for the world. Whether it was the Egyptian priest's total hairlessness or the Romans' daily scrape, the goal was always the same: to create a version of ourselves that was more perfect than the one nature provided. We have been chasing that perfection for 100 millennia, using whatever tools the earth gave us. But as we look at the history of the shave, we see that the tools always come full circle. We started with the stone, moved to the shell, graduated to the metal, and eventually reached the plastic and steel of today. But in recent years, there has been a resurgence in the primitive. High-end surgeons are indeed looking back at obsidian for its molecular sharpness. Modern grooming enthusiasts are returning to the straight razor, seeking the same honest signal of risk and skill that the Romans valued. We are fascinated by the tools of our ancestors because they remind us of a time when the stakes of being human were visible on our very skin. So, when we ask why ancient humans shaved with shells, the answer isn't just about the sharpness of the calcium carbonate or the annoyance of the lice. The answer is that the shell was the first door we opened to become who we are today. It was the first time we looked at the world and said, "I can make this better." It was the first time we looked at ourselves and said, I can be more than this. The shell was the bridge between the animal we were and the civilization we wanted to build. It was a tool of liberation, a tool of vanity, and a tool of survival, all wrapped into one discarded piece of seafood. Yet, there is a chilling reality hidden in that elegant solution. We often think of our ancestors as struggling to survive, but the act of shaving shows they had a surplus of will. They had the luxury of caring about the aesthetic. They were willing to endure pain and risk death for an idea, the idea of a clean face. This suggests that even in our earliest days, we were never truly at peace with nature. We were always at war with it, always trying to carve our own path through the wild. The shell wasn't just a tool, it was a weapon used in the longest war in human history, the war against our own biology. This brings us to the end of our journey through deep time. We have seen the fur fall away, the shells rise from the tide, the obsidian shatter into nanometer-thin edges, and the bronze gleam in the sun of the Nile. We have seen the Roman tonsure draw blood and the modern man reach for his plastic handle. It is a single, unbroken line of human desire. We are the species that shaves. We are the creatures that look at a sharp edge and see a way to reveal the truth of our own faces. And every time we do it, we are reaching back across the thousands of years to touch the hand of that first person on the beach. Now, I want you to think about your own routine. Whether you shave every morning or let your beard grow as a statement of your own, you are participating in this massive, ancient conversation. You are using the same logic that guided the Iceman and the Egyptian priest. You are signaling who you are, where you belong, and what you value. And that brings us to a question for you. If you were stripped of all our modern technology and left on that ancient shoreline, would you have the courage to pick up that shell? Would you risk the scrape to keep the civilized version of yourself alive, or would you let the wild take back your face? The answer tells you exactly how much of that ancient ancestor is still living inside you. Because the instinct to groom is not a habit we learned, it is a part of our DNA. It is the drive that took us out of the trees and onto the moon. It is the restless, beautiful, and sometimes dangerous need to be human in a world that is anything but. We are the makers of tools and the carvers of faces. And it all started with a simple, sharp edge found in the sand. As you go about your day, remember that the thin line between you and the wild is often just a few millimeters of steel or a single, well-placed shell. The next time you feel the cool slide of a razor or the pinch of a tweezer, think of the salt spray and the roar of the ancient tide. Think of the person who first realized that lunch came with a razor. Because even now, in our world of glass and silicon, we are still just a few steps away from the beach. The reality of our existence is that we are constantly trying to hide the animal. We use clothes to hide our skin, buildings to hide us from the weather, and razors to hide our fur. But the irony is that the more we try to hide the animal, the more we reveal our unique human nature. No other creature cares how it looks. No other creature risks its life for an aesthetic. That is our burden and our glory. We are the only ones who look at the reflection in the water and decide that it isn't good enough. We are the only ones who try to change the reflection by changing the self. Think back to that opening image. The single, cold, wet clam shell held against a human throat 100,000 years ago. In that moment, the shell isn't just a tool, it is a mirror. It reflects our obsession with control, our fear of the wild, and our endless, restless vanity. It is a reminder that we have always been willing to bleed to prove we are in charge. The shell is still there, lying in the surf, waiting for the next creature brave enough or foolish enough to pick it up. It is the definitive proof that we have never been satisfied with what nature gave us. We are the species that chose to be naked, chose to be sharp, and chose to be seen. And in the end, that cold, jagged edge of calcium carbonate is the most honest thing we have ever owned. It doesn't promise comfort, it only promises a clean break from the past. And that, more than anything, is the story of us. The shell was the first thing we used to cut ourselves away from the rest of the world, and we have been cutting ever since. That physical detail, the cold, sharp, jagged rim of a dead creature, is the true foundation of every city we've ever built and every law we've ever written. We are the children of the shell, defined by the violence we do to ourselves to prove we are no longer animals. The scrape of that shell is the sound of civilization beginning, and it is a sound that will never truly stop.